On this episode of Blending Bourbon, we're joined by Sherrie Moore, an industry icon who helps us understand the difference between Tennessee whiskey and traditional bourbon.
Blending Bourbon is the podcast that takes you beyond the barrel and behind the scenes of the whiskey industry with master blenders Dixon Dedman and David Mark Young.
Welcome to another episode of Blending Bourbon. My name is David Mark Young. Normally, I'm joined by my sidekick, who's Dixon Dedman. Dixon is not here today. Dixon is out doing what Dixon does. He's selling 2XO. He's out on the 2XO Roadshow. So he sends his best, and he will be back on the next episode of Blending Bourbon. So, unlike a couple episodes back, we won't have to sit here and listen to me ramble on about me and my world. We've got some more interesting dialogue and definitely a very interesting guest. One of my heroes, someone that, gosh, I could sit down and talk with Sherrie or listen to Sherrie for days and days and days. So I was in Bardstown. Gosh, it's been maybe a month or so ago, a couple weeks back, and just by chance had the great honor of meeting Sherrie Moore, who I'm honored to have here with me today. Sherrie Moore, welcome to the Blending Bourbon podcast. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. I appreciate you inviting me.
Oh, gosh.
And we had a fun week in Bardstown, didn't we?
We did. It was, there was so much there. And I was actually just kind of remembering that trip and some of the, there was that event. Well, gosh, it seemed like there were just multiple events. And then we ended up at the Volstead, which is a small bar, lounge, speakeasy, if you will. And they have the wall, the distiller's wall, I think,
yes.
Or where, heroes of mine have written their name, signed their name. I just saw somebody the other day had a post, and they were, I think it was, oh gosh, I forget who it was, but master distiller somewhere, and he was signing his name, and you put your name up there. And I think the years, we'll have to attach that video. I have video of that. And then I too, that was what was such an honor for me to be invited to put my name up there with yours and some of those other great folks. It was a great, huge honor, and have yet to share that video out. So this is actually good timing.
Yeah.
We'll have to attach that video to
well, the funny thing with my background in Tennessee whiskey, I wasn't sure they were going to let me write on the wall. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. They don't use that word too much. Tennessee whiskey. Yeah.
But I laugh about it, but I love the pride Kentucky has in their bourbon.
I agree. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. I get in there, and I'll, being in Nebraska, I'll talk about, some of the great things that we're doing here in Nebraska. And I'm always reminded that the best bourbon is made there in Kentucky. And I don't argue that. Kentucky makes, 95% of the world's bourbon, something like that. And, but there are other whiskeys. There are other great whiskeys around the world, including bourbons in the country. But gosh, where do we start? How about you start with your background? Once upon a time.
Yeah. Well, I sometimes I tell people I say that my career started in whiskey with one phone call. My great-grandmother, she lived in Lynchburg, and she served meals for the Jack Daniel tourists.
Okay.
And she wanted me to live with her. And I said, well, I would if I could get a job, because I lived about 20 miles away in the country, or 15 miles. And I said, if I could get a job. And she called Jack Daniels and said, I want a job for my great-granddaughter so she can live with me. And so I was 18. Okay. So I worked my way through college, working at the visitor center at Jack Daniels when I was 18. I did the summers and weekends and lived with her at the boarding house. They call it a boarding house. So if anybody looks it up, this Mary Bobo boarding house, a lot of visitors to the distillery at Jack Daniels will come there for lunch. So that's how I got in. So I didn't fill out a job application.
Okay.
Had no resume. I'm 18. I just graduated from high school, no resume. So I worked my 4 years through college. I had a chemistry degree.
Wow.
And then I called the plant manager secretary because Jack Daniels didn't have an HR department in 1975.
Okay.
And I started in 1975. I graduated from college in 79 and no HR department. I called the plant manager's secretary and I said, I think I want to work here if y'all have got a job. About 2 weeks later, she called and she goes, now, what's your major in? And I explained it. And 2 weeks later, I got a phone call to start. And I started in quality control. So I can still, I'm 66 and I've never done a job application. I've always, So that's my fun part. So I started there at the quality control in 79. And the one thing about the quality control is you kind of get your finger in all departments. So I rotated between the distillery and taking aged whiskey samples. So I spent several years there. And the one thing about coming into a company like Jack Daniels in the late 70s and early 80s is I'm going to say our average seniority was 30 to 35 years.
Okay.
So I worked with people that they might not have formal education, but they knew what the pump was supposed to sound like. They knew what a warehouse was supposed to sound like.
Yeah.
So I feel like I got such a good education like that. But I also, being in quality control, worked with Brown-Forman Research and Development. So Lincoln Henderson that started Angel's Envy, I got to work with him. So I was in between these people with no formal education, but I was also working with people with PhDs and masters in science. So I think I just was at the right place at the right time to get this education on a very technically sound method with R&D, but all the institutional knowledge and years of experience from people that might not have finished 8th grade.
Right.
But they knew how to make good whiskey. So I feel like that was fortunate. I also, when I started, the government, of course, they were ATF then, now they're TTB.
Right.
They were on site. So I learned to proof with a hydrometer and make the calculations with the government men. And they would test me. They would come in and they go, here are these numbers. I want to see you do these calculations.
Nice.
So I feel like I got such a good foundation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating.
Yeah. And, you know, a little side note, this was in 1978. It was the first year that they had 100,000 visitors. And so now you hear a lot about the tourism, but that was one of the things that was done at Jack early on, was to invite people there. And I think that they realized that when people understood the process of making whiskey, they would appreciate it when they had that drink.
Right, right.
So I love that all the distilleries now are putting so much effort into the home place.
Okay.
And we are becoming the Napa Valley in Tennessee and Kentucky and different places. I think people are fascinated with the process. And it's important, just like this podcast, when people understand what goes into making whiskey, when they come to a place and see it and they get to experience those smells.
Oh, yeah.
It makes your whiskey taste better. It makes your bourbon taste better. Oh, I just think it's, I'll just reemphasize, I love the consumers coming and learning and getting to experience what it's like to walk in a barrel warehouse and that smell. Do you not love that?
I love that. Yeah, that's I always say I'm a fanboy of all the things, distilleries, going in rick houses. Yeah, I love that smell. I love the atmosphere. I get as excited today as I did years ago before I even got into this. Yeah.
Oh, and if you can get to watch a barrel being dumped, there's something about scent. Is that not the prettiest color in the world?
Absolutely. Yep. I've got some slow motion videos. It's liquid gold coming out of that barrel. Yeah, it's very exciting. And even
Yes.
hands on, just thieving whiskey
Yes,
from a barrel.
it is.
It's such a good experience.
Little more about my career. So that's kind of the foundation of it. One of my favorite compliments is one of the older guys at the distillery. He came up to me and he said, excuse my language, but he goes, he said, somebody just told the biggest damn lie. And I said, what's that? And he said, they said you've been to college. And I told him, hell no, she hadn't been to college. She's got common sense. And so that was a compliment to me because I felt like I was accepted by them.
Yeah.
Because they were kind of leery of anybody with a college degree coming in there and messing with the process.
Sure.
So for them to kind of accept me. So I got to work in all the different departments, and then I got my first department to manage in 1988. Okay. So probably the first woman to have a department in operations.
Sure.
And
yeah.
So I had processing, what we call processing department. So I worked with the dumping of the whiskey, the filtration, getting it ready for bottling. And so that was a good experience for me. I also, I worked part-time. I worked hourly for a couple of years, and then I was in the lab, and then I went into management. And being hourly was probably one of the best things to talk about leadership training. It was good for me to see how it felt to have somebody say at the last minute when you need to work overtime.
Yeah.
So I was very careful that I would tell people we may need to work overtime so that they can make plans. Right. So I think it made me a better manager because of that.
Sure. Yeah, that's huge. It's only now, I think, bubbling to the surface that, women in whiskey, there's certain names. I know Marianne Eves recently has launched her own brand, and she was highlighted as I think the first female master distiller, at least in Kentucky. But Sherrie, your story is, I don't think you've written a book. Have you?
No, but I'm thinking about it.
You absolutely should. Yeah. All of the audiobooks that you shared with me, you give me some great, I've made my way about halfway through all of those. I have to go back and listen to them again a couple times to capture it, but the fascinating stuff. And even some of the things that, that you shared that have helped me as far as unearthing some of the history of Golden Sheaf. But your career, and I know we haven't even begun to scratch the surface yet, so continue on, please.
Well, one thing I like to talk about is when I was in quality control and we worked with R&D, we probably kept anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 barrels that we're running experiments on.
Wow.
So some of the things that we did, and this was in the early 80s, but I'd like to tell this one, we took barrels and we took the same wax that they were spraying on apples, and we sprayed the barrels with that wax.
Sure.
Because we were trying to see if we could still have enough oxygen interaction for maturing, but we could reduce the angel share.
Right.
Well, we sprayed those barrels. We had, probably 600.
Okay.
And, of course, all our warehouses at that time were Rick-style warehouses. So you kick the barrels. Well, when you kick a barrel that's been covered in wax, instead of going 10 feet straight, it took 90-degree turns, almost wiped out people. We thought we were going to kill our crew of people. So we were so glad that we didn't get the results we wanted because it was so dangerous. But we did that. Then we took some barrels and we actually did shrink wrap. Just to see what would affect the angel share and the yield. Well, then those barrels, you kick those and they would go 6 inches because there was no friction. So we tried all that. We were doing trying groove barrels. We did the groove barrels back then. And we were finishing in the 90s. We were finishing in sherry barrels for experiments, rum barrels. So I just got such a good education and exposure there.
Yeah. That and is that work to you? Is there ever?
Yes.
Is it work or is it fun?
No, mine is all fun. It's all fun. I couldn't wait to go to work.
Right.
And one other thing is, and I don't want to talk too much, but
I want you to continue to talk. Keep on talking.
People a lot of times will ask me, well, they want to hear horror stories about how the men treated me and how hard it was for me.
Okay.
And I honestly don't have any because I either ignored it or it didn't happen. But I think because I didn't come in this, I'm a woman, hear me roar, I'm fixing to be a trailblazer. I just came in and was myself.
Yeah.
And I learned from them that I really don't have the horror stories. Good. So I can't say I was in a toxic workplace. I can't say I was mistreated. And I loved what I did. Good. And I think that's a little bit of it too, is when you're having fun, it makes everybody else have fun.
Sure.
And they want to share. Because I would go to the warehouses and just watch the guys. I would go to the distillery, and some days I would just make sure I got my work done, and I would just go hang out.
Yeah. And
I probably learned as much hanging out in the workplaces.
Right.
On the little things.
Right. Absolutely, yeah. And you're learning from people, like you said, that have been there and know the things. They know certain smells. You're cutting into the hearts, or
yes,
when to turn the stills on, and all those things. And yeah, you pick up that stuff by learning it. It's not stuff. There's things that you wouldn't necessarily learn from reading a book or being taught in a classroom. Mm-mm. And so yeah, I imagine that's. You were, timing wise, it sounds like you got right in the middle of all the good things. And but then how long were you at Jack Daniel's?
I was there over 31 years. I ended up assistant vice president, director of whiskey operations. So I ended up with the distillery and the byproducts, barrel warehousing, charcoal mellowing, environmental quality control, and fire protection. And fire protection sounds kind of funny, but at a place like that, having fire protection was a challenge. Ended up moving that. I only had it for about a year or two, but that was, a good education.
Sure.
And learning to be proactive on preventing fires. How important it is for there's still a lot of really nerdy, boring things, but making sure that your lightning rod protection is working.
Yeah. Right.
So that you don't lose a warehouse of whiskey.
Right. Well, yeah, it's happened in the past. And
yes.
So yeah, being proactive and being able to, it's a lot of whiskey. It's hazardous material,
It is.
So I'd imagine knowing the ins and outs and the flash points and all the different things and the environment and how to proactively protect that. Did you ever have any disasters that you had to respond
No,
to?
we had no, I didn't when I was there, but when I was in processing department, we did have somebody cut in on a vent tube.
Okay.
And the tank imploded. We had a 50,000 gallon tank implode.
Wow.
And when you're Jack Daniel's, this was in the early 90s, when you're Jack Daniel's, that means the news station comes over and flies over in helicopters. Mm-hmm. So your mistake becomes very public. Yep. It was not mine, but I was in the control room when it happened. And I was like, what was that noise?
Wow.
And we were able to repair the tank, but we still made the news.
Sure. Yeah, it's a big deal. Locally.
But thankfully, nobody was hurt. But that one could have been a disaster. But I think because it kind of imploded versus going out, that nobody got hurt.
Wow. So you shared a lot with me when we were down in Kentucky, and there was this all very interesting. And gosh, we go on and on and on. But there's one thing in particular that stood out was, and I think you had spent a good deal of time in the role of as a taster, so ensuring that Jack Daniel's tastes like Jack Daniel's, continue to taste like Jack Daniel's, and so I'd love to hear more about that. I find it interesting because my job, I'm creating unique blends from batch to batch, which is sort of the inverse of what you were doing there. But can you get deeper into that so people can understand kind of what was involved there.
Well, one of the things that's almost funny is one of my jobs was choosing the whiskey for the blends and tasting and sampling. But instead of being a whiskey blender or master blender, my job title was quality control specialist.
Okay.
So it's one of those things that job titles, we didn't think of it then because we weren't thinking about marketing standpoint, but that's what I did. And one of our challenges at a large plant is you want consistency.
Right.
You've got so many warehouses. We were, even when I was over that portion of it, we had anywhere from 50 up to 80 warehouses. They've got more now, but I was up to about 80 warehouses. So knowing how each warehouse aged, right, what the first floor did versus the fourth floor, what the first floor versus the seventh floor, was it on a hill? Was it down kind of in a valley? And so you really had to work hard to create that consistent blend.
Right.
Whereas what you're doing, you could go make a unique blend on the top floor. You could go make a unique blend. We were trying to blend, mingle that whiskey together so we had consistency. We had a tasting panel, and again, over the years it varied, but we had anywhere from 20 to 50 tasters.
Wow.
And some of our best tasters on our panel, they could be a janitor, they could be on the bottling line, they could be at the distillery, they could be in processing. So not only did you have your quality control and your trained tasters, a smaller core group, we had this large group because we wanted to see with that many different palates,
right,
were we still being able to maintain that consistency. So we had weekly tastings for that. On our distillate, we tasted daily. We tasted after the distillery. We tasted after charcoal mellowing. And I probably need to explain. Can I go through Tennessee whiskey a little bit too?
Please do. Yeah.
But it took this group of people. But one of the things that I kind of sets, Tennessee whiskey from bourbon. It's always been that way. It's just gotten made official since 2013, the state of Tennessee. The government does not recognize it.
Okay.
The government really sees us as a bourbon,
right,
because we meet all the criteria. But Tennessee whiskey is distilled under 160. It is over 51% or more corn. Mm-hmm. It is bottled over 100 and over 80 proof. In the barrel, no higher than 125 proof. No additives, and a new oak charred barrel. So we meet the criteria of bourbon.
Right.
But we do two other steps. It has to be in Tennessee by the Tennessee law, and it also has to go through charcoal. And at Jack and the ones in Tennessee are using sugar maple charcoal.
Right.
And I think the reason, done a little research, it looks like the reason sugar maple charcoal was chosen is because it was plentiful. Okay. It was easy to get to in our area, and it had the least ash of most of our trees. So that's why it was done. So you take your sugar maple and you cut it into 2x2 sticks. We call them sticks, 4 feet long. You stack those alternating, and you let those season for about 6 months.
Okay.
And when I say season, that's just outside where it's getting sun. It's getting the rain on it that will leach out things that don't need to be there.
Right.
Then we burn that. We grind it into charcoal, and we've got a grinder there and a certain mesh, so we keep up with the size because you want enough surface area, but you don't want it a fine powder.
Right, right.
So we load what we call a vat, and it is 6 foot in diameter and about 10 foot deep.
Okay.
Of charcoal. So the vat itself is about 12 feet. Then we put in the 10 feet of the sugar maple charcoal that we've made. And you tamp that down. The guys have a tamper, and they get it in. Then you start the whiskey going through there. So what you first get off, it's very similar. We use the same words at the still. Your first whiskey off is called the heads. Mm-hmm. So you put that over to the side. because you have to run it through again because it may pick up too many fines.
Mm-hmm.
Then we go through. So we are tasting that whiskey to see when we change out the charcoal. And it usually can stay for 6 months or longer.
Okay. That was my next question. Yeah.
But we're tasting it just to make sure. We also check the pH on it. So we're keeping up with that. So that's the step that sets Tennessee whiskey apart. And that process actually started in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And it went from Pennsylvania, and it was Grandma Pearson's recipe.
Okay.
And her family moved to South Carolina.
Okay.
And in South Carolina, one of my family trees, the Bobos, married into the Pearsons. So they moved to Lynchburg, Tennessee, into the Moore County area. And from family documents, it was sold to Eaton Tolley Distillery, which was a big distillery there in Lynchburg. And this was prior to Jack Daniels.
Oh,
so
wow.
It looks like about 1825, 1830. Then they started doing this charcoal mellowing. They called it charcoal leaching. It's not very appealable, but that's what they call filtration back in the 1800s a lot of times. So that's where we started doing it. And if you taste, have you ever done before and after charcoal mellowing a smell or taste test?
Yeah, I have actually.
It is very distinctive.
Right.
It takes a lot of the corn notes off.
Right. Yeah. Now, real quick, what's that called? I've heard that referred to, is that the Lincoln County process?
Call it the Lincoln County process, charcoal mellowing, and charcoal leaching. When I got there, the building said charcoal leaching, and then the marketing people said, no, we're not calling it that.
We need a prettier name if we're going to talk.
We need a better name for that. So lots of distilleries in Kentucky use this method. It came from Pennsylvania, so it was used a lot. And then after Prohibition, the only distillery that started this process back was Jack Daniels.
Okay.
And Jack didn't have any children. I'm rambling. Jack didn't have any children. So his nephew, Lem Motlow, was already running the distillery with Jack. And then when Jack died, Uncle Lem took it over. So he was my great uncle. I think it is. I think he has another great. So that was my uncle. So when he started the distillery after Prohibition, he made sure to add that step back. Okay. He felt that was that important. And I also helped with a brand, Uncle Nearest, and they put in the same system, helped design their distillery. And it was a very good lesson for me because being at Jack Daniels, all the capital had been spent. So the only cost we had was just making new charcoal. And there is a cost to this step.
Sure.
But when I was helping design a distillery that needed this room and this process, it adds a lot of cost. It was a reminder of the capital investment it takes to add this step in.
Wow.
So so nobody's doing it. Just, what am I trying to say? You have to make a very conscious decision that this is what I believe adds a distinctive taste and quality to my whiskey.
Right.
Because it does require quite a bit of capital, and then you've got your ongoing cost of replacing that charcoal.
Right. Yeah, and creating it, putting it in place. Yeah, I imagine there's pretty hefty cost and resources and time and all the things in there, and it's a commitment, right? I mean, you do.
It is a commitment.
Are you aware of any? I mean, there has to be Tennessee distilleries that don't incorporate that process.
There's only one, it's Pritchard's, and everybody else is doing that on some level. They may not be in a 10-foot deep vat, but they're going to be doing it. So they do meet that criteria to be able to put Tennessee whiskey on their label.
Gotcha.
So you have Chattanooga Tennessee whiskey, you have Old Dominick, and they are doing charcoal mellowing.
Okay.
And of course, George Dickel does it. The other thing in some of my research I thought was funny is Vanderbilt University. I found an article where one of the chemistry professors was doing a study on this process, and he had his handwritten graphs out on how the pH changed. So It's fun to see that they were studying it even back then.
Absolutely, yeah. My business partner Sean, his son is leaving for Vanderbilt next week. I think he's attending law school actually. See if we can get him to switch to distillery studies.
Yes.
But yeah, that's fascinating. It absolutely is, and I love your knowledge, not only your experience and knowledge and expertise, but your knowledge. I mean, I can tell right away that you're passionate about all things whiskey and definitely history. I mean, your wealth of knowledge history wise is you need a book. There needs to be a Sherrie Moore book. You've got incredible stories.
I've got some stories. I think one reason I want to tell the story of Tennessee whiskey and that process, the Lincoln County process, and a little bit about Tennessee whiskey history is because I'm not telling it from a marketing standpoint.
Right.
Because I don't work for a company now. I have my own consulting firm. I'm going in and helping people. So I can honestly tell you the history and I don't have to slant it with a marketing vibe. And for me as a consumer in any other market, I like to know the facts. Don't just send me a marketing story. I really want to know the truth. Yeah. It's not going to be a negative towards your product, but I want to know the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's just it. There are some embellished stories out there, and that's marketing.
Yes.
With Golden Sheaf, I know I shared a little bit with you about that, about the backstory and, the colorful history. But you opened up other avenues for me. I love the idea of recruiting a historian or bringing a historian on board to be able to help with that and expand on the already interesting backstory. But one of the things that you had shared was about Prohibition and how that, I never really thought about sort of the mindset during Prohibition and those that were in the profession that simply walked away from it because of the shame perhaps that was instilled upon people. It's so, whether it was like religious background or just some of the negative things that, led up to Prohibition. And so it makes sense. And that's kind of what we're finding is that there's this big void of, okay, the distillery that produced Golden Sheaf shut down in 1920, and that was it. And the thing that's always intrigued me was why are there not, it was a significant part of history, especially here. It's third largest distillery in the country pre-Prohibition. It was, they were generating upwards of 90% of state tax revenue. Why did it just disappear? And why aren't there buildings or parks or
excuse me,
it's such a significant story that, all the things that the amount of money that they contributed, there was no income tax and so on. And so 90% of the state tax revenue, and I always compare, I don't know how accurate this is, but compare Omaha to a truck stop back in the day. It was kind of not a lot of people were coming here to set up camp, but it ended up being, a great place for opportunity. And so when they connected the railroad and the Golden Spike, the Transcontinental Railroad, opened up a lot of opportunity, and then the cattle industry really boomed from here, creating infrastructure to be able to fast move, transport things. And so that's what happened was the folks that started the distillery pivoted because of Prohibition, but they had already invested in cattle and land and created the Omaha stockyards. And but to simply walk away and not return something that was that significant, not return after Prohibition was the lingering question. And so you opened up kind of a whole, another pathway of possibilities. And, it kind of looks like, there was some shame involved in that, that, oh, nope, we had nothing to do with the spirit industry. We're in the cattle industry and that's it. It just wasn't talked about. And that's what happens as time passes 100 years later. If nobody's talking about it,
nobody's talking.
Yeah. It's not part of it.
Well, I think when you're sitting around with your family, they're going to tell you about the relatives that was a preacher or a doctor, but they don't tell you about the relative who was a horse thief or a distiller, especially after Prohibition.
Yep.
I, being raised in Tennessee, not only are we in the Bible Belt, but we are the buckle of the Bible Belt.
Right.
So I think we lost a lot of our history because the family didn't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
because so much of our history is oral in our family. And I think that's a lot of it. And then I think people had gone on to new professions, new careers, new companies, and to go back and get back into kind of the sin industry.
Yeah, it had that stigma.
It had a stigma to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So
that's one of my theories.
Yeah, and it's a pretty solid one. I've like I said, the audiobooks that you've and we'll have to I'll share those with Myron. He can tag them, as well. Put some of those audiobooks out there. It talks about Prohibition and history. I mean, I love that. I always I do these tastings, and I love talking about history. At least the little that I'm familiar with, and when you talk about the Whiskey Rebellion and how we just won a war, but we're broke. And how do we become a superpower without any cash? And how do we create infrastructure for this new free world? And so what do we have a lot of? We have a lot of stills, and we start to tax those, and that kicked off the Whiskey Rebellion. But why did we have a lot of stills? And that's what I love telling that. The whole we had stills because grains have a shelf life, and you can convert them to something that you can store and transport and trade, and so getting into that kind of stuff, and then even what Prohibition was, because in grade school, in the public school system, they just kind of teach you that the government decided we should take a break from consuming alcohol, and there's more to it.
Yes.
There's a lot more to it.
Well, people talk about how divided our country is now. And going back and reading the books on Prohibition and the Ken Burns, you find out this wet and dry was probably one of the biggest divisions our country's gone through.
Right. Yeah.
And it went on for decades.
Right.
But by the time they did Prohibition, there was so much tension there.
Right. And until I started reading, I forget which book it is. I'm listening to it now.
The Call. Or The Last Call?
The Last Call. Yep. I'm pretty sure. Yep, that's it. Last Call. I'm on chapter 6. I had no idea. It's almost as if somebody just came up with this good idea, like, hey, let's eat healthy, or hey, let's not drink. And then boom, every shut down production, sales of alcohol, and that's it. There's not a lot of detail unless you go digging for it. Watch a movie about why and how long that movement had been kind of in the works, and how it originated and why, and in the division. That's huge. So I find this stuff interesting, and I think a lot of folks do just during tastings, and it's become part of whiskey culture, I think, now. And I think that's one of the reasons why whiskey is becoming more and more popular. Certainly the marketing around, at Jack Daniel's and other distilleries, people are cashing in on this. I mean, they're not just building an operational distillery; they're building an experience for people to come in and get their hands dirty and thieve their own whiskey. And I love it. So I think it's fascinating that you are part of that history. You can.
It's fun for me to been there for the introduction and on the team for doing Jill Jack. Led the project on Single Barrel, and it's seeing Lincoln Henderson start Angel's Envy based on some of the research that we had done in the 90s, and then him being so successful. It's been one of the other things I think I told you is I was also part of the team where we started studying toasting of barrels, and now that's become a big part of the industry.
Right.
And I always compare toasting barrels to, I love sourdough bread, but let me have a piece of toasted sourdough bread when those sugars are released.
Right.
And so I love to see, I was glad I was part of that, and I love to see what that's done.
Yeah.
And the little bit of the history on that, Brown-Forman had always made their bourbon barrels. So they didn't buy it from outside. They'd always made theirs. And they bought some wineries, and they decided, well, we're going to make our own barrels. And as we were setting up that cooperage, not that I was part of the cooperage, but as they were setting it up, we got talking, this toasted and learning about toasting. And we thought, why don't we try that?
Yeah.
So I got to be on that team, and
That's cool.
we were amazed with how much more complexity that toasting
Yeah.
adds to the profile.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. One of my favorites is Penelope. They do a great toasted series on their bourbon, 4-grain, and it has a unique taste to it that I just love. I just had some last night, and matter of fact, I sent Mike Palladini a little picture. Hey, just thinking about you. Cheers.
Yeah.
And it's one of my favorites. But I love that.
And Independent Stave has taken that on. Of course, Brown-Forman makes barrels only for themselves, but Independent
Right.
Stave has been good because they've taken on the toasting, and they've got such good, you probably know Andrew from Independent Stave, and the studies that they're doing. It's R&D that's being shared with other distilleries, big and small. So they have served such a good purpose to carry that toasting on and to make it available to all
Right.
of their customers.
Yeah.
And just the variation on how long you toast and how long you char.
Right.
It's fascinating if anybody gets a chance to see any of those talks on barrel toasting, it's fascinating, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, it is. Absolutely. And that's really the point to this podcast. We call it Blending Bourbon, but it's behind the scenes. I think that's the introduction, behind the scenes of the industry. So Dix and I we share our, day-to-day kind of the things that go on behind the scenes and that you don't think about. But so much goes into that bottle of whiskey that's on the shelf, from the labels, the glass, the closures, everything, making the whiskey, and then the barrels. So that whole evolution, that whole life of everything coming together, to me, is fascinating. And yeah, so gosh,
we were so country there in Lynchburg, none of us drank wine, really didn't know anything about wine. And so with the Gentleman Jack, our market decides we're going to have a cork. Well, we don't know anything about corks. And we started getting complaints on the Gentleman Jack, and we compare it to the retain that we had in quality, and theirs would taste different. And we had to scratch our heads. We finally figured out it was the cork. We were having cork taint and this whole time in movies as a kid, when I saw people smelling a cork, I thought they were smelling the wine. I did not know that when the waiter was doing that, it was to see if the cork was good, because he knew if the cork was good, the wine would be good.
Okay.
So that's what we got, such an education. We had the guys from Portugal come over and explain making corks. And that was amazing, just to learn. I don't know where I thought cork came from, but I didn't know it was Portugal, and I didn't know it was from a tree, a cork oak tree.
Same, yeah. I have no idea.
And how we had to really work with them to increase the quality control in their processes to eliminate the TCA and running tests on that. But that was an education, is to find out. And now you see corks a lot. But yeah, if you ever get a complaint, always check your cork.
Yeah, same. I'm kind of dumbfounded. I always thought also they're smelling it for the...
Has the wine good?
Yeah, or at least
no.
I've been smelling it all these years.
Yes. No. It was to see if there's taint in that
okay. I'll have to
cork.
ask people why. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
A little
but that was an education we got, was because you take cork had been used for decades much.
Yeah.
In whiskey. Now you see cork all the time, but at that time everybody had a screw top, so that was very much, that was going out there with that cork. So with not such good results.
Right. So what's your opinion on the artificial non-cork closures?
I'm more, if you're going to do cork, I'd rather have the natural cork and pay more for the quality.
Okay.
Now, if you're doing a clear product, then you're going to need that synthetic, because you could get some discoloration.
Sure.
But it's almost, to me, with whiskey and wine are similar on two things. With whiskey, your best closure really is a screw top.
Okay.
Now, does it look good? No. But a screw top is your best, or ROPP, or your plastic screw top. And in wine, your box wine is really the best system.
No kidding. And why is that?
But because you don't have the oxidation going on that you do, and you don't have to worry about cork pain.
Okay.
But there is just something so good looking about a cork.
I know. Yeah.
It just makes you feel good. So I understand the practical, but I have to say I like it. And I think that's one reason I love Prosecco and champagne, because I just like to hear that cork pop.
Yeah.
And there's something about taking a cork out that is just so much more fun.
Right. Well, yeah, and you'll
than unscrewing one.
Yeah. You'll never see $100+ bottle of bourbon that's got a screw cap on it.
No.
That's interesting. So that's one of those things. Everybody, they like it that way because that's how it is, and it's it has that classy, sophisticated, so anything that's upper tier has a cork in it. Gosh,
and you'll have to go learn about corks, because corks is fascinating itself. But now you're getting such higher quality corks than you did 30, 40 years ago. They have really increased their quality. So I don't think there's as much chance out there. But I would always advise when I'm working with anybody, do not get the lowest price cork, because you're probably going to get the lowest quality.
Absolutely.
That is where you're going to spend the extra money.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And that's great to know. Because, you see that, unfortunately, you'll pop a top off and and then you've got to dig out a cork, or, have a cork that's in a bottle, and, or you lose it down in the juice, and then you've got to strain your juice to get the cork pieces out. But yeah,
that's one of the things you don't save money on.
Right. Yep. Do not cut corners on your cork, your closure. Well, Sherrie, I hate to bring this to an end, and I would actually extend an open invitation to you to come back and join us anytime. Matter of fact, I would love to on another episode when Dixon's back, because he's just this wealth of knowledge and history and all the things. So I feel like there's just so much more. I feel like I'm robbing our viewers and myself but I'm going to continue to call, and we'll meet up, and I want to hear more and more. I think we have a trip to Europe planned, don't we? Aren't we going to?
Oh yeah, we're going to Italy.
That's right.
We're going to check those corks out over there too, see how they're going to do. I want to hear if they pop just as good over there or better than over here on the Prosecco.
In Italian cork pop. Well, thank you very much for the gift of your presence here. I'm honored that you would take the time to join us and share just a little bit, just a little sliver of your world. Fascinating. You are at the top of my. I am your number one fanboy. I want you to know that. So thank you very much.
You're very kind. And tell Dixon I have not met him face to face. I don't think so. I want to get to know him. Absolutely.
Well, we're planning stuff. Not sure if you're going to be in Louisville or Bardstown over the coming weeks or months. I'll be down there quite a bit. We're actually bottling at Bardstown Bourbon Company next week. Actually, by the time this airs, we might have actually bottled. But there's always events and stuff going on. So look forward to crossing paths soon and hanging out, drinking some more whiskey together. Not sure if you have anything to cheers there with, but
I don't. Thank goodness I had some water.
There you go.
I've got some bottles back behind me.
I see that.
I am working. I'm doing consultant work, so I don't really have an office. So I ducked in somebody else's.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for taking time. I know you're a very busy woman, and really appreciate you. We'll be in touch. Sherrie, cheers to you. Thank you. We're going to tag all the things and keep you posted about all, when we release this, and look forward to sharing it with everybody. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, all the things. Ladies and gentlemen, Sherrie Moore, thank you again for joining us, Sherrie. And we'll go ahead and sign off. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you.